Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. Can somebody let me know whether or not you can hear me all right now, please? Thanks, I appreciate that. Just going to give everyone another minute. People are still coming into the webinar, so we'll let everybody get settled and we'll begin shortly. Thank you for taking some time out of your day to join me today. My name is Carrie Simpson. I'm the founder of Managed Sales Pros. We're a sales development company that supports technology manufacturers, distributors, and resellers. A few housekeeping notes before we begin. On the panel on the right, you'll see a place where you can type in questions and chat with us. There's a moment in the middle of the webinar where we're going to talk a little bit about whether or not it makes sense to use a PSA and a CRM or one or the other. And I'm going to ask you a couple of questions about what you're using for your MSP. So at that time, if you don't mind popping in some responses, I'd appreciate it, just so we can share with everyone else what's working for people. Other than that, please hold your questions until the end of the content presentation. There will be a little bit of time for Q&A, and that way I can stay on track and on time and respect everybody's end of the day. So today's agenda, we're going to review the CRM and PSA solutions that were most popular for the attendees on this webinar. So when you registered for the webinar, I asked you to fill out a couple of questions talking about what you were using. And I prepared content focused on the top 3 solutions. We're going to talk about the differences between CRMs and PSAs. We're going to talk about other available solutions, talk about the initialisms, the definitions, and clearly delineate where one begins and the other ends. We're going to talk about whether or not you need to buy both or whether you can use one solution to support your entire business practice. The disadvantages and advantages of using multiple platforms, the advantages and disadvantages of using an all-in-one platform, so using your PSA only for prospecting. I'm going to suggest a few things that you can do that are platform neutral, whether you're using a PSA, a CRM, an ESP, or both. We're going to talk about some platform-specific fixes based on the 3 CRM solutions that you identified before the webinar. Then we're going to answer any questions you've got. So the Gartner Magic Quadrant for May 2020 talks about the leaders in the CRM industry currently. And if you look up on the leader visionary, the highest top corner, we've got Salesforce. And then kind of in the lower bottom corner, we've got Zoho, which I find very interesting considering that nobody on the call today is using Salesforce for CRM. And one of the most popular CRMs for the attendees today was Zoho. Nobody uses Sugar. Nobody uses Microsoft. Nobody's using Zendesk. And some of these other ones I haven't even heard of before. So there are some prohibitively expensive enterprise systems listed on this Magic Quadrant that most SMB MSPs wouldn't use, simply from a cost perspective and a delivering pizza with a helicopter perspective, right? You don't have a lot of use for an SAP system. ServiceNow is a fairly robust solution that most smaller MSPs wouldn't use. Again, Oracle, huge enterprise solution that you would need to be an Oracle expert to use. So in order of the most users to least users on the webinar today only, in order, HubSpot is the most popular solution used by the most MSPs on the call today. Now, one of the things I didn't ask at the time was whether or not you were using the free CRM solution or the more expensive pay-per-lead marketing platform. Zoho was the second most popular, and that is the solution that we use in-house. So I know that one inside, outside, backwards, forwards. It's a very inexpensive platform, and it has everything you could possibly imagine needing, and many things that we don't use. We use only the CRM, but the Zoho One solution has every other app in the world. So any app that you would have to purchase as a bolt-on to any other CRM system, Zoho is just included in their all-in-one, under $40 a seat pricing. But in my experience, Zoho is mediocre at everything instead of being really good at one thing. So that's a consideration whenever you're going for the less expensive, less popular solution in the market. You're going to sacrifice something. Zoho is a great solution. It's an inexpensive solution, but it's not going to be as robust as some of the other options on the market, and the support is not as robust as some of the other solutions on the market. Connectwise, number 3. And again, I didn't ask people to specify whether they were using Connectwise as a PSA only. Some people did write in that they were using Connectwise and another solution, and in those cases, I counted to those solutions each got 1 point each. So these are the top 3 that we're going to focus on today: Hubspot, Zoho, Connectwise, Autotask. Autotask, in my experience, has a beautiful visual interface. I found it very easy to quickly find the things that I wanted to use. I found it very easy to segment data, but much like Connectwise, it is purpose-built for a CRM. It's a PSA, and you can use it for customer relationship management, but it wasn't built to do that, so you're always going to have to find workarounds. And that's my experience with Connectwise as well. Infusionsoft is a less expensive marketing platform. It's built for email marketing, and it is a per contact program, meaning that you pay for every piece of data you put into the software, whether or not you're using it. So it requires a lot of attention to detail. It's not a CRM solution, but it will work as one. So once again, lots of workarounds to make Infusionsoft work like a CRM and not a marketing platform. TigerPaw, there's a few TigerPaw users on the market. I have not demoed TigerPaw in over 5 years. I do have a demo scheduled next week because when people mentioned they were using it, I wanted to take a look at it. For those of you who don't know TigerPaw, they have a pretty decent foothold in telco. They work with a lot of VARs, but they're new in the managed services industry, and they're just pushing into the market right now. People mentioned they were using MailChimp. That is an email solution provider, not a CRM solution. People mentioned they were using Sales Genie. That is a data procurement platform, and you can use that platform to manage data in Sales Genie. The big drawback here is that if you decide to get rid of Sales Genie, all of your data goes with it. So with other CRM solutions, you're not using the data that that company provides. With Sales Genie, you are. So we have a Sales Genie subscription. We pull data out of it and we put that data into Zoho. So we maintain ownership of the data once it's purchased, as opposed to working with it as a service the way you would in the Sales Genie platform. MyMatrix was mentioned. Again, that's an email service provider. They also provide syndicated content. It's not a CRM platform. And there's a significant number of people on the call that don't have a CRM or a PSA at this point. They're tending to decide, so hopefully we can help them today. Now, again, mysteriously absent, Salesforce. I would have thought that there would be a lot of Salesforce users. I find Salesforce prohibitively expensive for the SMB market, but it's also one of the most robust CRM solutions out there, and it's probably the most popular when it comes to trying to identify experts that can support you in the administration of a CRM solution. Sugar CRM, open source solution. Especially with IT companies, I would have thought that people would be using systems that they could customize simply because they had the skill to do it when most small businesses don't. And I was also surprised to see a lack of any Microsoft solution on this list. So just for your information, that's what people are using right now. Let's move on to what I want to talk about, which is, are you going to need both a CRM and a PSA to run your MSP, or can you run it right out of your PSA? Do you need to make an investment in both? And if so, how do you do that well? You know, a PSA isn't a CRM. No matter what you do, you're not going to have the functionality that is purpose-built into a customer relationship management system in your PSA. So When we first started Managed Sales Pros, we worked in people's Connectwise databases. People would buy us a license, our colors would go into our clients' Connectwise instances, and we would work in those instances. So we did learn a lot about moving data around in Connectwise. We learned a lot of shortcuts and things that you could do to prospect more efficiently. But when we moved to Zoho, we went from an average of 8 dials per hour up to 22 dials per hour. That's a huge, huge factor to consider when you're thinking about what you want to do with your sales process. Now, I imagine it's been 5 years since I used Connectwise for anything, so I'm not going to sit here and say that Connectwise hasn't improved that or hasn't improved the way you can move and sort and segment data for effective prospecting. But when we made the move to bring everything in-house, own all of our data in-house, and support clients using our own system, there was just a significant efficiency and process improvement that came along with it. A lot of the pricing structures when it comes to stacking software solutions are untenable for SMBs. So you could buy Connectwise, you could buy Salesforce, then you could buy Hubspot, and you could use all of them. But at that point, you're looking at, once you add a voice over IP system or any other integrations into your sales stack, you're looking at potentially a $600 or $700 per seat, sales seat. Whereas, we're doing it here for under $70 a seat. That's how much it costs for me to have an agent sitting at a desk every month. Our software commitment is under $70 a month. Integrations are a factor to consider. So most systems are only pushing one way. So you can buy multiple solutions and you can use a product like Zapier or Kazumi, which is what we use, to push data from one system into another. But unfortunately, most of the time, you can't set the systems up so that they push data both ways. So one system is always going to have great data and the other one is going to have the data that you move into it. So all things being equal, one system makes more sense if you want to look at a snapshot of your customer lifecycle from the very first moment the lead came into your system until you offboard them. I think that's the biggest thing to think about. When you want to learn your metrics, when you want to start improving your sales process, you need to start measuring things. And if you're always pulling information from multiple places, it's significantly harder to aggregate them, sort them, and review them. There are workflow and automation fails that you have to consider when you're using multiple platforms that are integrated or using APIs. One thing dislodges or they stop supporting a certain integration, which happened to us a few years ago. And all of a sudden, nothing talks to anything any longer. That's a huge consideration. Again, if you're using multiple platforms, you'll want to consider, what do we do when this company stops integrating with that company? Because that does happen regularly. And then, personally, I believe that an industry or niche-specific PSA, like Connectwise, like Autotask, is a better tool for managing your data than a generic CRM solution will ever be, simply because it's been purpose-built with managed service providers in mind. So you're already starting from an advantage where the company that you're partnering with understands what you're trying to accomplish. Whereas if you're using Zoho or Salesforce, you may have to bring in an industry expert. So bring in someone like Managed Sales Pros, for example, who can set up your Zoho database for managed services prospecting. But it's going to be very difficult for you to start from, raw data or an empty sandbox and build out the processes that you want. If you're starting with TigerPaw, Connectwise, Autotask, those processes are already baked in, and it's going to give you a little bit of an advantage learning how to use them better. So for those of you today who are considering what you want to do, hopefully that gives you a little more food for thought. So what are the advantages of using both a CRM and a PSA? Well, you can change out one without having to rip and replace your entire system. So if you've ever changed PSAs, you understand how challenging that can be. If you're going to change one solution that does one thing, so if you're going to swap out your CRM solution for another one, you don't have to affect the other side of your business. So your service business is going to continue as is without you having to worry about everything happening at once, managing multiple processes in one system at once. You can just change out one thing at a time. So that's definitely a benefit and something to consider. I don't want to be held hostage by one system ever. Another pro is a clear delineation for you between what happens with prospects and what happens with customers. So if your data is living in Zoho or Salesforce, that's a prospect. The minute they sign on the dotted line, all of their information gets transferred into your PSA, and now they're a customer, and your processes and your customer service and your ticketing and everything else will be listed there. So that's great for processes, because once you've got that moved over, now your sales team is home free. So you'll want to consider things like, how are you structuring out your sales roles within your organization when you're thinking about how you're going to move forward with your prospecting CRM. If you have account managers that are responsible for both finding and then managing clients, it's going to be really challenging for them to operate in two platforms. So if you're developing a system where you've got lead generators and then closers and then account managers and then, you know, people who are responsible for landing and expanding, you may want to consider how those roles play into how you're storing and managing your data, simply because I don't want my account manager, for example, if they're the ones who are responsible for helping me get that business over the finish line, and then they're responsible for helping me manage whether or not they're happy with our services, I don't want them having to spend half of their day just shuffling back and forth in between two different tool sets. So another pro to using both, it can be pretty inexpensive if you're a small business and you've only got a couple of users. So if you've got 2 people that are using Zoho and 2 people that are using Connectwise, that's not a very big investment. As your company scales, you may want to consider how many people you want working in each platform. There are some drawbacks to using both as well. So larger firms are going to have to pay for licenses and contacts that they're not using. There is no real clear snapshot of customer lifecycle or sales pipeline without using another system to create dashboards. So you could use a system like GreatGauge, for example. Oh, people are mentioning that my voice quality is coming in and out. This is a brand new headset because somebody made fun of me for having a shitty headset last week. So if I move this, is it better? All right, thanks for the update, and I will try to be a little more mindful about that. Other than does it sound better? All right. So another con to having 2 platforms is one of your platforms is always going to have better data because of that one-way sync capability. Another thing to consider is you might not be able to integrate the 2 platforms you actually want to use, or you may not be able to integrate them well, or you may have difficulty determining which platform does these 5 steps and which platform should be responsible for these 4 steps. So if you think about using a CRM solution, an email marketing solution, a PSA, and a voice over IP system, if you're going to integrate all of those things and then start creating some complex workflows to eliminate some of the more redundant prospecting activities, you've really got to be either quite tech savvy, and a lot of business owners are, but is your highest and best use right now figuring out how to integrate 4 or 5 platforms together, or should you be doing something else with your time? One solution eliminates those challenges. More systems you have, the more things can go wrong, the more difficult it is to trace back problems to a specific point. And so if you're going to work backwards from, hey, where did the wheels come off the bus here? How did we accidentally email 700 people with a blank email that said, dear first name, last name, blah, 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 right? How did that test email go out of the database? Did it happen here? Did it happen here? Did it happen here? You're going to have to do a lot of quality control. You're going to have to be on top of this on a regular basis. If you don't have an in-house expert, if you're going to use multiple platforms, you're going to need one, or you're going to be paying for support from all of your service providers. So if you need support buckets, and that's usually how the CRM solutions sell their support services, you can buy 10 hours of support or a bucket of hours here, and you're going to have to aggregate those and use all of them. So depending on how big your company is right now and what the roles in your organization look like, if you've got an expert in CRM administration on staff, you can do whatever you want. Otherwise, you need to start thinking about, okay, it's not just the cost of the licenses. What's the cost to integrate everything? Do we have an expert who's going to be able to explain to us how we're going to take this system, make it talk to this system, set up the workflows that are going to be necessary, and then problem solve when it doesn't go correctly? Pros of an all-in-one solution. So if you're just going to use your PSA, if you set it up correctly, and that's the big caveat for all of this, if you set up your PSA correctly, I do not believe that you need to purchase a CRM solution, especially if you've only got a handful of people who are touching your prospect data. An all-in-one solution gives you better information for more cohesive reporting. It gives you a snapshot of your entire life cycle of a customer, and that's really important. I have found that most of the time when an MSP calls us to talk about prospecting, when I ask them how long it takes them on average to close new business, they don't know. When I ask them how much it costs for them to close new business, they don't know. Managing all of your data in one spot will tell you that, especially if you organize it correctly. I like only learning one thing. I like only teaching one thing, right? We work with managed service providers only because I only want to teach my reps how to do one thing. We use one software system only because I only want to teach them how to do one thing. All in all, it's going to be less expensive using one system. You've already bought that system. So eventually, if you're not using a PSA, you're going to. There's no way you're going to manage a scalable managed service provider without using a PSA of one kind or another. If you're going to make a big investment in setting that up, you may as well make an investment in setting it up properly for all aspects of your business. There are some drawbacks, of course. One, you're held hostage by your provider at that point. It's really hard to change when you've built all of your processes into one system. And we do a lot of prospecting for brand new PSAs that are coming into the market, and we try to give them a lot of advice on this because most of the time people hate their PSA. I have never spoken to an MSP who is like, yeah, no, we love working with company X. It's like, they're all right, but changing is a pain in the butt, right? So that's not a resounding, like, that's not a ringing endorsement of any particular solution. People just don't change because they don't want to deal with changing. It's disruptive. Another thing I don't like right now about the market is innovation is 100% in the hands of private equity firms, and private equity firms care about profit. They don't really care about making the system better. They care about making their investors more profitable. So you're kind of like stuck with what you have right now. And if you like what you have right now, great. But if you don't, you're kind of stuck there. And I don't imagine it's going to get better anytime soon. If you've got a resident expert administrator for your PSA, and that person is you, what's your succession plan? How do you ever get out of your business if you're the only one who can figure out how to use that thing properly? And if your resident expert isn't you, what's your succession plan? What do you do if that person walks out the door? So having an all-in-one solution means you've got to continually have a couple of backup experts. So you don't just have to train one person on the administration of your PSA. You got to train multiple people because you can't risk, maybe your clients are, or pardon me, maybe your team members are the happiest employees you've ever met. And that doesn't account for one of them winning the lottery and never coming back to work. We used to say being hit by a bus, and then somebody that works for us got hit by a bus, so we don't say that anymore. Nothing was really purpose-built to do more than one thing well. So the one thing you'll have to consider if you decide that you're going to prospect using your PSA is that it wasn't built for that. It was built to manage tickets. And you can do this, you can absolutely do this, but it's going to take some setting up and some attention, constant attention as you work out the bugs. Oops, sorry, let's go back a minute. So these are some platform neutral suggestions. So no matter what solution you're using right now, there are things that you can do to better prospect in any platform. That first thing is using your user-defined fields to segment your data better. So a user-defined field is any field that you could customize the way that you want it. So in Connectwise, for example, you've got stages, you've got other drop-downs that you can create so that you can organize where in the stage your prospects are, but you can also look at things like what are they interested in. So if you're having a conversation with a company and they mention that they're interested in backup, they aren't happy with the backup solution they're using, that pain point can be added to a user-defined field. So now you can create buckets. You create buckets of interest or of size or of any other kind of identifying information that creates something unique that you can speak to. So that means you're prospecting to everybody that said that they were interested in backup using the same emails, and you're prospecting to people that are interested in projects using the same emails, and you can identify them quickly and easily because you've created these user-defined fields. You can get more complex using drop-downs for things like number of employees, annual revenue. So do you want to talk to law firms who have more than 20 lawyers who are interested in backup? Boom, now you've got your prospecting list, and you can create talk tracks around those prospecting lists that allow you to, instead of having to pivot nonstop while you're on the phone, right? Have a conversation with an accounting firm, have a conversation with an engineering firm, have a conversation with a law firm. Flipping back and forth like that is really challenging. If you can start creating buckets of prospects that are all interested in the same thing, you can really hone your talk tracks effectively, and you don't have to flip-flop back and forth every day. So if you're going to think about doing territory division, for example, as your company grows, is it going to be territory division by size? Is it going to be territory division by industry? Start thinking now about what your company is going to look like in 5 years and in 10 years. If you build out your PSA now for the company that you're going to be running in 10 years, you're not going to have to go in and rip and replace and do all the expensive damage control that everybody that just hastily puts something together because it's good enough for now experiences. Like, I wish that I'd considered when I started my business that one day it wouldn't just be 5 of us sitting at home making phone calls on our landline phones and entering data into Connectwise. I wish that I had thought, like, hey, my goal is this. We're going to be a $10 million business in 10 years, and we're going to have 100 callers, and we're going to do this, and we're going to do that, and I would have set my business up differently. So right now, it doesn't cost you any more to set up your Connectwise instance really well. Hey, if you've only got 4 employees, fine, no problem. Set up your 4-employee user instance of Connectwise as if one day there's going to be 40 users in Connectwise. It'll be cleaner and easier. And trust me, it's way easier to switch things out when you got 4 people in sales than it is when you've got 40. The change management involved in changing systems and solutions when your company is that large is astronomical. It's a year-long project as opposed to a weekend-long project. Start adopting common naming conventions and abbreviations so that you can search for information easily. So if everybody abbreviates words differently in your PSA, you're never going to find anything, right? If one person uses NA, meaning not available, and then somebody else is using NA as not applicable, right? One means somebody wasn't there to answer the phone, and the other one means this isn't important. There are a lot of different ways where you can be confused by the notes that the person before you left. So if you have a cheat sheet of sorts, where you say, all right, these are the things that we abbreviate here. These are the disposition abbreviations we use, and these are the only ones we use, and you can't draw outside the lines here. We do it this way for a reason. I have found that sharing with my team why we do things the way that we do is significantly easier than saying, just do it. So we sit people down and we explain to them how much time is lost every day just looking for things. Like a phone call that you had 2 weeks ago, like, oh, okay, I talked to that guy, he called in. They were a 20-seat company and they were working with Joe's IT. And, you know, like you think you're going to remember all these important conversations and you can't because you have too many of them. Once you get to the point where you're prospecting full-time all day, every day, you're not going to remember conversations you had before. So make sure that you're using easy phrases that can be searched. Force your mandatory fields. So if you're managing a team of callers, there are some pieces of information that you're going to want to know all the time, right? And you don't want them leaving this page until that data is filled out. You can force mandatory, meaning that I can't leave this page until I fill out this piece and click save, right? Whatever it is that you want to know on each and every call, make it mandatory. One of the things that we started doing this year, we picked up from a book called, I want to say it was Atomic Habits because we've been raving about that book all year. There was a a process that Japanese train conductors were using to eliminate accidents on the train platforms. And it's called point and call. And it's just like, this happens, this happens, this happens. And everybody does it all the time. So for us, when we're calling into the managed services space, for example, there are 3 pieces of data that I always want to know. And those pieces of data are, how many techs do they have? What's their annual revenue? And how many endpoints do they have under management? And I want to know that for a couple of reasons. One, we call that the triumvirate. That magic number tells us, are they a best-in-class managed service provider, or are they a VAR that just started selling managed services? So if I have a client, for example, who wants to talk to, best practice level MSPs who are managing X number of endpoints, you could have a VAR with a small managed service practice that looks like a really great opportunity, except they're only managing 100 endpoints. So there's something wrong. And we teach our callers to put their finger right on the screen, okay, number of endpoints, number of techs, annual revenue. And there's a number that you're looking for, that each tech should be managing X number of dollars in revenue and X number of endpoints. And if any of those 3 numbers are off, there's a problem with this lead and we need to figure out what it was. Either it doesn't belong in the database, or they aren't an MSP, they're just self-identifying as an MSP. Don't be lazy when you're putting new entries into your PSA or your CRM. Use a new entry for every note or activity, especially if you're a sales rep, right? If you own the business, fine, do whatever you want, but remember that eventually someone's going to come up behind you and have to clean up after you. If you do it well now, and if you demonstrate to your team how you want it done, now you have a culture of data integrity, and if it's important to you, it's important to everyone. If you hire a rep who has to come in behind you and clean up after you and look at the way that you've been taking notes, they're going to take their lead from you. They're not just going to do as you say, they're going to do as you're doing. So if your notes are garbage and you're cheating, and I call it, that's cheating when you're working Connectwise, for example, and you're just adding information to old notes instead of opening new ones, you can't clearly identify how many times you had to reach out to that person before you connected with them. So if it took you 17 phone calls to get someone on the phone, you want to know that, because you're not going to be able to have an accurate measurement of whether or not you're getting better, right? Did you go from, hey, it takes us 17 calls to get somebody on the phone down to 13? That's a huge improvement, and you'll never know that you were able to make that improvement if you're not measuring things correctly. So new entry for everything you put in there. The buckets we've already talked about. Deconstruct your sales process. So start from the win and work backwards. Identify the places where you should have known X, and if you had known X, it would have gone faster. So the whole point of using a CRM solution is to speed up your process, right? We want to close more business. We want to close it faster. We want to eliminate points of friction. We want to eliminate barriers to success. The better you're using the systems that you're given, the better you're going to be able to do this. And again, the better you measure, the faster you can improve. So if you're setting realistic goals year over year, going from 17 to 13 touches before you get a conversation, that's a fantastic goal. Let me know when you hit it. So starting with HubSpot, since that was the most popular solution, there's a couple of things that you can do just to make life easier in HubSpot. So if you take a look at the left-hand side of the stage here, all of these user-defined fields are customized. So what do you want to add? What do you want to know? It's super easy for you to go in and customize anything you want in HubSpot. You can filter your contacts out by any user-defined field that you want at that point. But on the left-hand side here, if you want to start creating those buckets, you create them by filtering through these user-defined fields. So for us, I want to know, when am I supposed to be following up with people? How many employees do they have? How many times have we interacted with this company? So what are the number of sales activities it took us to get to the close? The more things you track and measure, the more things you can report on later, and then you can start getting really granular about where you're experiencing success. So things like, hey, we do really well with companies that have under 50 employees, but over 30. So our sweet spot is 30 to 50 employees. Those things close 50% faster than the things that we pursue that have more than 50 employees. So when you start managing your data that way and you start looking at things in those buckets, Now you have the opportunity to say, you know what, we're going to 100% focus our efforts this year or this quarter on things that close within 90 days. Or we're going to have a rep that works only on things that we know we should be able to drag across the finish line in under 90 days. And then we're going to put another rep on things that take over 120 days. So the way that you would look at taking that data and using it in a purposeful way, if you have 2 sales reps, all things being equal, and you have the opportunity to hire one of them, there are sales reps that have worked in what I would describe as quick turnover sales environments, right? They're selling things that close fast and they close every day and they like those quick dopamine hits. And then you've got your long-term hunter type sales reps where they're working on great big closes that take a year, 2 years. Those personality styles are very, very different. So once you figure out what your magic number is, or if you have multiple magic numbers, now you can start hiring to your number. As opposed to just hiring a sales rep because they've got sales experience, now you can look at it and say, okay, well, tell me about your average time to close. What did your sales cycle look like? What sales cycle do you like to work in? So if you're interviewing a sales rep and they say, you know what, I like to work in organizations where I can close something every couple of days. I mean, you already know that that's not going to happen in managed services, but you can get a little more granular in identifying the right sales personality for your company and potentially 2 sales personalities, and then putting them both into the spots where they're going to be the most useful to you. Again, here you can see on the right-hand side where you can slice and dice your data in HubSpot so that you can clearly see anything you want to look at. So for me, in this particular database, this is a system that we set up for a company in Tampa. What I wanted to see here is what stage was everything at. I wanted to see it quickly because they were having problems with their telemarketer because they weren't reporting on anything that she was doing. So we had to start from 0 to identify all the basics, right? Okay, so I want to know, when is their contract ending? More than anything else, that's the piece of data that I want when I'm looking for managed services opportunities. Because the best managed services prospects are the prospects that are already working with one of your competitors. And you want to just start nurturing that, babysitting that, clearly following along the path to a win. And the path to a win starts with knowing when they're going to be open to talking again. You're not really looking for clients that are going to break agreements, right? If I'm going to fire my managed service provider every time somebody calls me with a cheaper offer, that's not a client that you want. You want clients that make informed decisions to choose better service providers at a time that is beneficial to their business and not disruptive. So unless everything's gone to hell, you know right now that if the contract end date is 2021, you don't start talking to them every week in 2020. You create a process based on this contract end date. So the reason you want to get that up there in HubSpot is because you can build out all of your workflow automation from that date so that you never miss a good opportunity. What type of IT support do they have right now? How many servers? How many users? You can pretty much predict your sales pipeline for the next 5 years if you set this up correctly. So you're going to want to go into the back end of HubSpot and start choosing user-defined fields that'll make it easier for you to find information quickly. Moving on to Connectwise. Connectwise is a really interesting tool simply because if you put everything in there correctly, you're going to know everything you want to know all the time. Right? You have to go looking for it sometimes, but it is a very robust solution. And if you've made an investment in it, and again, I've got no horse in this game. I'm not even a big Connectwise fan. I'm just a really big fan of doing the most that you can with one solution. And Connectwise is a fairly robust solution, and people are buying it for a purpose, right? Like people are buying it and they're still buying it because it does what it's supposed to do. Again, not purpose-built for prospecting, but you can bully it into doing what you want. And as long as you're accurately logging everything in Connectwise, you're going to have a successful prospecting experience in Connectwise. So if you look at this one here, and I had a client scrape this for me, and I blacked out identifying information. But right here, I want to know what happens next. When do I think it's going to close? What type of opportunity is? What stage is it at? So here's the place where you can start customizing information in Connectwise. You don't have to have just the stages that they've put in here, you can create a whole new user-defined field if you want, or you can add stages. So if you want to measure things a little more efficiently than just having 5 stages, right, you can put in as many as you want. It's a very personal choice. So I'm not going to tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing, but I would put more stages in simply so that I could see where my whole sales pipeline was, and not just, hey, what things haven't I called yet? What things have I called? What things are going to close and what aren't, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can manage information in there. And status, that's a defined field by Connectwise. Is it open or closed? Probability, now, probability you can use effectively if everybody understands what that means. So my sister, Tracy, the president of the company, is a very conservative forecaster. Tracy doesn't believe anybody's going to buy anything until the retainer hits our bank account. I believe that everybody that says they're going to buy something is going to buy it tomorrow. So I have a great sales conversation. My probability of closing, it's 90%. Woo! Tracy's probability of that same conversation closing is probably 10. So if you're going to create accurate sales forecasting or accurate sales pipelines using Connectwise, you're going to have a clearly defined document that identifies what every stage looks like. So if it's at 10%, what does that mean? 20%, what does that mean? 30%, what does that mean? So you're going to want to go through every user-defined field and clearly identify what you want people to understand when they're filling out that box, so that you don't have a, let's say, for example, everybody is an aggressive forecaster and everybody puts everything at a 90% probability, and you're like, okay, well, we're about to onboard 500 seats in the next quarter. We better hire some people. Except that none of them were actually opportunities and everybody was just forecasting really aggressively. So as long as everyone's using the exact same understanding of what you should be doing, the probability here makes for a great predictor of what might happen in the future. And rating, is it hot, is it cold, where in between? Source is important. So where are your leads coming from? And if you know where your leads are coming from, you can start attributing revenue to those sources. So this is obviously a client of ours. This was a telemarketing cold call. That's how they track it. So everything that we send to them, they can easily identify, here's what our ROI on this particular campaign is. Here's what our ROI on email marketing is. You can add user-defined fields in Connectwise. Again, I haven't done that for 5 or 6 years, so I don't want to lead you astray. But it would be worth a phone call if you're going to start setting up your prospecting in Connectwise. You'd want to partner with someone who's an expert in that. Now, Zoho, we are experts in Zoho. And the things that I've highlighted here for you to take a look at are the buckets that I would consider looking at as I'm sorting through my information. So, do I want different messaging for in-house teams? Do I want different messaging for companies of certain sizes? Do I send different emails to companies that are working with friends? So I don't know how often you come across this, but we come across this all the time. It's like, oh, my brother does our IT support. Oh, my son who just got home from college does our IT support. Right? Are we going to start developing talk tracks around that particular piece of information? We can. Number of users, number of employees, types of industries, people who are already in managed contracts, people who are using break-fix contracts. So the more you can sort your data, the better you can use it to market moving forward. So I really like the way Zoho is set up so that you can customize what you look at and when. So if I'm looking at a list of the calls that I have to make today for somebody, I'm going to look at it with a full view of being able to prioritize which ones I believe are hot and which ones I believe can wait until closer to the end of the day. I always want to start with my highest and most important follow-ups at the beginning, moving down to my less important ones. So you can use a user-defined field to do that, or you can just use the built-in one in Zoho. We have a lot of user-defined fields. I wouldn't necessarily recommend using the number that we use in-house, but we're also prospecting for 50 companies at any given time. And we have to manage a lot of data, and that means sorting things really, really carefully. Here are the fields that I've added, the user-defined fields that we manage, right? Number of desktops, number of users, number of servers, the age of the servers, right? Are they getting close to end of life? When is their contract up for renewal? What are they complaining about? And again, these are drop-down, customized, user-defined fields so that I don't have callers spelling virus protection incorrectly every time they enter it and I never find it again. Same with people identifying what vendors they're working with. We want that done in a drop-down so that people aren't misspelling the names of your competitors and we can never find, hey, okay, they're using Joe's IT. Well, if one person's spelling Joe this way, another person's spelling Joe that way, we'd never find all of the Joe's IT clients because they're all incorrect. So once you understand your market better, every competitor you have should be in a drop-down field, and you should be aggregating information, not just on your prospects, but on your competitors. What kind of IT support do they have? How many phones are they supporting? And the rest of that is internal stuff. Then we look at things like, what date did we call them? What date is the appointment for? What time is the appointment? What time zone? And all of this stuff is set up to automatically fire, not just to our executive team and our administrative team, but to our client as well. So we only have to type things in once, and then we push a button, and everything that we need to happen happens when we hit that button. The calendar invite goes out, the email to our client goes out, it's added to a report, and then that report fires to the client automatically at the end of the week. So you can set it up to do anything you want once you know what you want it to do. So how can we help? Well, if you're interested in someone else doing the heavy lifting, we can help you customize your CRM or your PSA. We can help you choose the one that you want to work in. We can help you create your sales playbook and document all the processes so that you've got a nice book to hand to your new hires when they walk in the door. We can train your team on that process. We can teach them how to prospect. We can provide as much or as little consulting support as you need. And if you don't want to do any of it, we can do your sales prospecting for you. We've got a little bit of time for Q&A right now. So the first thing I'd like to ask the group, if you don't mind responding, just by typing the answer in, is, are you using a CRM and a PSA? Are you just using one? And if so, are you only using a PSA? And after the conversation we've had today, are you considering changing what you're doing currently? And if you're going to give advice to a brand new MSP just coming into the market, what would that advice be when it comes to managing data effectively in any system you're using? There's been a lot of responses saying they're just using PSA. And again, I'm a big supporter of one tool. Does anyone have any questions for me while we're aggregating some information here? We can definitely help with AutoTask. Thanks for the question. Happy to chat with you after if you want to send me a quick email to hello@managedsalespros.com. Well, if nobody has any questions for me today, our next webinar is going to be on August 4th. And there's a company that competes with us in some places. They also do outbound sales prospecting, but they are pivoting to support companies that want an outsourced sales management process. So they want to hire their own caller in-house, and they want to manage that caller using somebody who is an expert, who's going to hold them accountable, who's going to manage them. And what I really like about this conversation right now is that with the world, with the new normal, a lot of us are looking at hiring people that are never going to come into our office. So hiring sales reps right now, for example, is there any reason that your New York-based MSP couldn't work with a sales rep in a much less expensive market and have that sales rep managed by somebody else in another inexpensive market? So I'm going to have Tim from Osprey Strategic Research on August 4th, talking about how they manage data and how they manage callers for other companies. So hopefully you'll join us for that. Again, if you've got any questions, I've got about 10 more minutes to answer those questions. And if not, you get 10 minutes back in your day, and I'm very appreciative that you spent that hour with me today. The slides are available and the webinar will be available, and you should receive a copy of both automatically in a couple of hours after it processes. GoToWebinar is pretty good about stuff like that. Yeah, that's my pleasure. Thanks for attending. All right, well, thank you, everybody. If you have any other questions, you can reach me at hello@managedsalespros.com, and I will look forward to chatting with you at another time. Hopefully, we'll see you on August 4th. Have a great day.